as I said, we're a little bit discombobulated in this class. It doesn't look like it's making any rhyme or reason. We're not going anywhere. We're running in place. That's all right, do your other classes. We'll get on the treadmill pretty soon. I just have to get this background stuff. So why don't you just get into it? Well, because I think the background stuff is really important. And even though it's been a bit spotty and sketchy, things dribble in. So what should we be doing? Nothing. You don't have to work all the time. Work on your other classes. You know, life is meant to be fun. And sometimes you can absorb things just through fun. So, you know, plowing away, beating away at some stack of something that you promptly forget 3 weeks later doesn't necessarily get you anywhere. So just bear with us. You can be looking at Josephus. You can be looking at the stuff from Paul I've been reading to you. Right? So you've got stuff to look at. No point looking ahead in the Gospels, because I'm going to pick out stuff in the Gospels that we'll work on. And I'm not going according to that sheet I handed out. That sheet I handed out is for university consumption, not for your consumption. That's because you're supposed to hand out a sheet. And it's great. You know, I like to play it by ear, wing it. I was coming into the driveway tonight, this morning. This is a good wake-up call, you know. And I was in the right lane, turning off of 7th Street into the parking lot. I was the first one in line, so turned in, and first one that was coming behind me turned into parking lot, my thing, parked the car, all getting my books out, and this guy comes up with a sort of some kind of beret or some other kind of hat on. He said, "Oh, excuse me, sir. Do you mind if I tell you something?" I said, "No, what's that?" "You didn't use your turn signal." I said, "Oh yeah, I always use my turn signal." "No, I was watching you. You didn't use your turn signal." I said, "Well, I was only turning right, and I didn't need to use my turn signal." He said, "Well, I was right behind you." I said, "Well, it was good for you then. So you didn't have any problem, right?" so I say, well, I mean, you know, there are some people in the world. I mean, really. Well, I didn't tell you the rest of the exchange. Oh, you want to hear the good part? Well, I said, "You know what you should do?" I said, "You're in the wrong profession. You should join the police force." Yeah. Oh, he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean. I hope when I said would help you." I said, "Well, I can't remember what I said." Anyway, good way to start the day off. So, yeah, we've been reading Paul. And why have we been reading Paul? Because it's a good way to start the study off. The position that I'm, as you're beginning to suspect, coming from is that you really can't understand the Gospels as we have them without understanding people like Paul. Now, we don't have time to read all of Paul in order to get a background for the Gospels. You say, why Paul? Because I think what most people don't know or think or maybe realize or haven't thought about even, that many of Paul's ideas have permeated into the historical Jesus. Therefore, to some extent, undermining, you might even say, if you're mean-spirited, corrupting the portrait of the historical Jesus. In other words, the historical Jesus often sounds like the historical Paul, who never met him, never knew him, and so on, was an upper-class person with a Roman citizenship, etc., 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 etc. So how can a thing like that happen? Because it's called retrospective history. I've been telling you a little bit about that. Retrospective history. Something is, what does retrospective mean? It means someone at a later time, let's say someone is putting things together at 100 AD, let's say, or even 120. I mean, it's hard to say when these traditions first got put in the final form that we now have them, because the ultimate final form was not till the 300s. And in fact, the late 300s, at one of the church councils after the Council of Nicaea. It wasn't even done at the Council of Nicaea, the final form, which Gospels were going to be considered orthodox, the final form of the Gospels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which letters were going to go in. There are different collections, and I'm not a great history on the tradition of the putting together of the New Testament as we presently have it. But, you know, so you say, oh, well, yeah, but stuff was circulated before that. Oh, yes, sure. Competitive stuff, too. But in addition, let's just say, let's forget all those problems of the 200s and 300s and what was finally accepted to a council sponsored by Constantine and Eusebius. And I told you a little about Eusebius' mindset last time. I have never met such a bigoted mindset in my existence. And if you picked up Eusebius, you would be like horrified. You would think you were reading Joseph Goebbels. You know, I'm not, fortunately Eusebius is not a saint for us, so I don't have to hold back from saying things about that particular approach. But I kid you not. You just have to look at him and you'll see what I mean. He glories in people suffering, he glories in people dying, he glories in all kinds of things as long as they're on the other side. In other words, there's no Christian charity there. There's no love of enemies. There's no any of the things attributed to Jesus in the Gospels in Eusebius. You say, how can that be? Well, that's the question we're trying to answer in these kinds of classes. How can that be? And that's a question you say in the 21st century that, you know, is very meaningful. How can that be? And it's been made more meaningful by the Dead Sea Scrolls. Again, why? Because the Dead Sea Scrolls were put in caves for some reason or other. Probably because the people writing them were seditious or an underground anti-establishment movement of some kind. And they were hidden or deposited or left. We can't be sure, we weren't there, of which the three it is. But we do know that they were probably undisturbed except for one intrusion in around the year 800 that we know about. They were probably left undisturbed for going on 2,000 years now. In other words, they didn't go through the editorial processes of any establishment group. In particular, they didn't go through the editorial establishment of the Roman Empire. In particular, therefore, well, they didn't even go through, that's probably why they were put in the caves in the first place, so they wouldn't go through, because they wouldn't be acceptable to any editorial establishment. If they had been acceptable to any editorial establishment, you see, you wouldn't deposit them in caves. In a quasi-hiding place, not really hiding necessarily, it's not clear if they were hidden or if people just ran away. Are you following me? But what is clear, and I've said it before, I'll repeat it, it's so important, nobody came back to get them. Now you're talking about, almost 3,000 different manuscripts on parchment, a very valuable commodity in those days. People used to write on both sides of parchment. They didn't like what was on one side, they just turned it over, crossed out the back, and started writing on the other side. It wasn't like a piece of paper you throw in the wastebasket. Parchment was a cured skin of an animal. It's quite valuable. It went through a certain process of production and development. So you're talking about valuable pieces of material, even if you didn't like what was written on them. Nobody came back to get them, no one. And that means, first of all, that no one physically could, geographically speaking, including little children who presumably would have remembered where they were and come back after things were quieter and found their parents' manuscripts, like you would go to your parents' old burned out house or something if you were a little child and something had happened in your household and you wanted to go back and look for relics or this kind of thing. No one went back, no one mentioned it to anybody, no one told anyone, no one gossiped about it, no treasure hunters came. That means, to my mind, only one thing. No one could come back, and even probably more, everyone died. Everyone was killed who was responsible and knew anything about these documents. That's, to my mind, the only explanation. Because they're not, they're 20 miles from Jerusalem. So at a later time, the peaceful time, even You know, oh, hey, you know my uncle? He was with some group that put all this stuff over there in caves. Let's go back and get some of that stuff and sell it. No, nothing like that. So I think everybody was killed, taken to Rome, executed, brutalized, whatever. Committed suicide. Masada. I told you a little bit about Masada last time, but if I didn't cover it, Masada is this fortress about another 25 miles down the Dead Sea, where all the Jewish holdouts committed suicide rather than surrender to Rome in 73 AD. In 73 AD. It's a famous episode. Josephus describes it at the end of his Jewish war. It's an incredible site if you see where it's located and so on and so forth. It held out for 3 years after the normal holdout. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and the holdouts on Masada went until 73, when women and children were all killed by their heads of families, and then the heads of families killed by lot, killed each other off, and so on. And everybody was killed. And I think those are probably some of the people responsible for the writings in the Dead Sea Caves, because we found Dead Sea Caves like documents at Masada. So I think that is true. Okay. So that's one group of materials that didn't go through the editorial processes of the Roman Empire that we've discovered now. So that throws a whole new light on everything. If for 20 centuries, you see, you are living in very important times. If for 20 centuries nobody knew about this kind of material or what was in it, and it turns out to be extremely messianic, and to have some of the most important passages we know in the New Testament in it, but interpreted from a 180-degree opposite viewpoint, a pro-law, as you can well understand through Paul's writings in Galatians that I read you, a pro-law approach to even the very idea of the new covenant. You know, Christianity considers itself the new covenant. Jesus, in his Last Supper speech, first mentioned by Paul, then put in, or conserve, whichever way of looking at it you want to take, in the Gospels, says, this is the new covenant, this is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, which was poured out for the many, or poured out for you. And then he goes on to explain it a little bit. And Paul goes on to explain it more. Well, the many is a big concept at Qumran. We say Qumran is where the scrolls were found. The New Covenant, we even name one of the documents. The New Covenant, the Damascus document, the New Covenant in the land of Damascus. That document is full of the passages about the New Covenant, but it's also full of a lot of other passages that you find in Scripture, interpreted differently, of course. For instance, in Acts we have James's speech at the so-called Jerusalem Council. In case you're not familiar with it, it's in Acts 15. And Peter is saying something, and then James' speech, and then he speaks about the Gentiles coming in, and then he's saying, I will raise up the fallen tabernacle of David. And he quotes a passage, the passage about the raising up of the fallen tabernacle of David. I think it's from Amos, the prophet Amos. That's a basic component of the Damascus document from Qumran, probably one of the central passages. The star prophecy, which is the Bethlehem star ideology. The star is the Messiah that will come out of Israel. It's from Numbers 24. It goes something like, a star will rise from Jacob, a scepter to rule the world. That's what's called the world ruler prophecy, which the whole New Testament is an answer to, presenting Jesus as the new world ruler, etc. So these are, and the star prophecies in 3 different places among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and one is in actually a proof text compilation. You know, we used to have out on the campus, not so much anymore, but 20, 30 years ago, when these things were very strong here, we used to have preachers standing outside, and they'd give out little sheets of paper with all the proof text for the Messiah on it. How many have seen those kind of things when they have the proof text for Jesus? There's actual text like that among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is a proof text of Messianic prophecies, all laid out in just that form. And that's 2,000 years ago, including the star prophecy, and the seed of David, and some other ones, and he shall be my son, and things like that. A whole list of them. Another document in the Dead Sea Scrolls says, this is the time of the preparation of the way in the wilderness. This is the time of the preparation of the way in the wilderness. We've heard of that. We know it's the way the three so-called synoptic gospels open up, right? It's the mission of John the Baptist. And John came, and it's applied to John in the wilderness, making a way for the Lord, preceding Jesus. This is the time, and that's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I can read it to you, actually. I got a translation of it here someplace quickly, because I can find that pretty quick. It's in column 8 of the community rule. And it reads something like, let's see, talking about the community council being a, being a precious cornerstone. We know that Jesus portrayed as a precious cornerstone. A sweet fragrance, that is, their righteousness will go up instead of sacrifice. A house of perfection, an agreeable free will offering, atoning for the land, and so on and so forth. And these people will walk in perfection of the way. We'll hear about the perfection ideology. Any case, and according to these rules, they shall separate. That's what it says. They shall separate. Go out from the habitation of the ungodly men. This is the definition of the leadership of this community. Which is why it's called the community rule, like a monastic order rule. The people who first entered these materials. By the way, I was ill last week because on Tuesday because I had laryngitis, and so I didn't come in because I couldn't speak. So I'm beginning to collapse as well at the moment, but we'll probably get through this. Anyway, ungodly men shall go into the wilderness to prepare the way of God. As it is written, there it is. Prepare in the wilderness the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a path for our God. Well, it's just right out there. The way is the study of the Torah, which he commanded by the hand of Moses. Well, that's just the opposite of Paul, isn't it? We just read Paul about, this is Agar, Mount Sinai in Arabia. The Jews are enslaved to Mount Sinai. Agar, they're the sons of the slave woman. We're the sons of the free woman, Sarah, because we're free, therefore cast out the bondservant. And lots of other things like that. I'm not taking sides here. I told you, I don't observe Mosaic law any more than I'm going to observe Sharia law. These are things from the distant past, some helpful, some maybe, you know. I mean, we have hygiene now. I can eat lobster, shrimps, and crab, and things like that, you know, and I happen to like clams a lot. So, I mean, you know, I'm not going to have anyone tell me from, you know, the 3rd millennium BC what it is I should do. But on the other hand, avoiding blood, as we found out in the contemporary period, it was probably a very good thing in terms of not just consumption of monkeys and things like that could have started AIDS in the first place, but actually getting near blood of any kind, which the Jews had a horror of at that time. I think they probably understood some of these related diseases, so they put taboos on them. So there are things in there that probably actually are quite good. Turns out that circumcision is more protective against diseases of that kind, and they're trying to reinstitute it in Africa and places like that because of the issues of well, hygiene is difficult for males. I'm not arguing good or bad here. I'm just trying to explain that I think there are things in the law that probably go back to very old remedies that people were trying to institute in a taboo type sense. You see. Anyway, good or bad, I'm not trying to Just trying to show you we don't want to have contempt for all things ancient. Anyway, so this way, you see, is the study of the law, not the way to Jesus. The way is the study of the Torah, which he commanded by the hand of Moses. So is this a pro-Moses group? Oh yeah, absolutely. But they're using the same passages in a pro-Moses sense. That they may doing is a huge idea here. It's the base of the word works. According to all that has been revealed from age to age, and as the prophets revealed by his Holy Spirit. So we have the Holy Spirit here, and the Holy Spirit is used to explain why you should do things in the way it was done previously. You follow me? I'm not trying to say this is inspiring, I'm just trying to give you a different... And no man among the member of the covenant of the community who deliberately, on any point whatever, turns aside from all that was commanded, etc., shall touch the pure food and things like that. Okay, that starts it there. And so these people become an atonement for the sins of unfaithfulness without the flesh of holocaust and the fat of sacrifices, and so on and so forth. Let's see if I can find it. And then it repeats it over here. He shall separate, judge every man according to his spirit. He shall conceal the teaching of the law from the men of lying, but he shall impart true knowledge and righteous judgment to those who have chosen the way. This is the leader of the community. They shall walk perfectly together in all that was revealed to them. This is the time for the preparation of the way in the wilderness. Again, repeated a second time.
He's preparing. He's talking about the Messiah.
Let me finish the quote. For this is, he's not talking about anything yet that we can be familiar. I'm just showing it's a parallel thing. This is the time for the preparation of the way in the wilderness, and he shall teach them to do all that is required at that time, and to separate from all those, so you separate, who have not turned aside their way from ungodliness. And he shall be a man, zealous for the law, whose time is for the day of vengeance. And he shall be a man zealous for the law. No, this is a bad translation. And zealous for the day of vengeance. And zealous for the day of vengeance. Well, it's a very aggressive group, very militant group. And there's no, by the way, pacifism here. It's not peaceful. As seen contemplating their navels, as it's usually presented to. It's a very aggressive, Bin Laden almost mentality. I'm not trying to say that it's good or bad. I'm just trying to show you what it is. The interpretation has been pretty skewed. Well, that's just another one there, which has all of the kinds of text. There is another one here. It's called the Habakkuk commentary. There were certain commentaries on different prophets. So, for instance, here's another famous one. If you know anything about Christianity, and most of you do. It's got in another document called the War of the Sons of Light Against the Sons of Darkness. It talks about how God is going to join their ranks in this final apocalyptic war against all evil. How God is going to, and then it sings to God this thing, and truly the battle is yours, the power is thine, it is not ours. Our strength, the power of our hands, we accomplish no mighty deeds except by your power and by the might of your greatness. Thou hast taught us from ancient times, saying, a star will rise out of Jacob, a scepter to rule the world. And then it goes on to do the rest of the quotation that I told you about from Numbers. And it said, by the hand of your Messiah, who discerned your testimonies, etc., 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 etc. So, I mean, you know, we're getting this kind of thing over and over again. And later on, for instance, it says, and Assyria shall fall by the sword of no man, the sword of no mere Adam will devour him, Isaiah 31:8. And in other words, what is going to happen is, these are codes, because that's from the book of Isaiah, but it's applied to the now. Thou wilt deliver into the hands of the poor. The poor are the name of the Christian community in Jerusalem. the Ebionites who followed James, and I'll give you an Ebionite document in a moment. You shall deliver into the hands of the poor the enemies from all the lands, to humble the mighty of the people by the hand of those bent in the dust, to justify thy true judgments in the midst of the sons of men, and win for thyself an everlasting name among the peoples. Thou wilt fight with them from heaven, for the multitude of thy holy angels is in heaven, and the host of thy angels is in your holy abode, praising your name. And you have established a community of the elect of your holy people. Blah, 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 blah. That will muster the hosts of your elect in their myriads and their thousands with the holy ones and your angels, that they may be mighty in battle, and smite the rebels on earth by your great judgments, and together with the elect of heaven. For you are terrible, O God, and your glory, your kingdom, and the church or assembly of your holy ones is among us, giving us everlasting help, and we despise kings. We mock and scorn the mighty, for our Lord is holy, and the King of glory is with us, with the holy ones. The angelic hosts are among our numbered men. Well, I don't have to read you much more to give you the temper of what this material is. This is a description of the final apocalyptic war against all evil, led by the Messiah coming on the clouds of heaven with the heavenly host. That's what it is, in a different language than what we get in the scripture as we know it. That is a encapsulated description. This is a more detailed description of it. So these people are saying that the heavenly hosts are going to come, and later on they say you are like clouds, clouds of rain covering the earth and so on. The host is like clouds. And they say it twice in this document. So that is actually a description, that's in my new book, and you can read it if you ever want to look at it, of the coming of the heavenly host on the clouds, led by the Messiah from the star prophecy here. It's hard to penetrate this group. It's a little bit, dense and so on if you've never encountered this. But even I raised my voice and got a little excited there because the language is so breathtakingly, exciting, militant, and would be like going and hearing someone whipping you up into one of these frenzies for what we see going on in the present day. And any of you who are in evangelical or fundamentalist congregations and so on know that we are expecting the return of the Messiah in glory to do some of the things that are being outlined here. And waiting for maybe the rapture is something a little different, but waiting at least for some of this final reckoning that's supposed to be coming at some time, before too long or in the not too distant future. And that's how they saw things too. So what I'm trying to tell you here is a source of other material that we didn't have before, that did not go through the editorial process of the Roman Empire. Our job is to date it. It's sort of from this period. If you want to date it 100 years before this, 200 years before this, that's the argument in the battle over these scrolls. But I think that's a red herring to send people away because it doesn't resemble the documents the people who interpret this material are familiar with. They say, oh, it must be an earlier period. I don't think it's an earlier period. I think it's exactly contemporaneous period. The only difference being that the materials we have were written overseas. The materials here are written in Palestine. Now, I couldn't have adopted this position without these documents. So we do live in an incredibly unique time for this kind of activity and study. Let me read you one more thing before I get to this gentleman's question, because I don't want to break the thought. Here is this Habakkuk commentary that I was telling you about. These are things that were found well preserved. We've got documents that weren't found well preserved. These were, let me see if my book's falling apart here, so I don't know if I've got the right hey man, let's see, where is you? Okay, here it is. This is funny. This is really funny. Let's see. 240, 241. I hope this is, what page is this? What is this? 239, 240. Oh, there we go. This is the Habakkuk commentary. I'll just read you this quickly. Commentary is they quote the prophet the way we do in our scriptural handouts when we're doing proof text, and then they give their weird analysis of what it means at the present time. And the prophet, many of you probably never even heard of Habakkuk. But why is Habakkuk so important, or Habakkuk if you prefer to call him that? What's the important thing about Habakkuk that most of you who are Christian in this room will know, should know, may have heard but didn't realize you know it? There's one passage in Habakkuk that's the building block of all Christian theology. I told it to you, I think, the other day. What's that passage? Habakkuk 2:4. That with Genesis, I think 15:6, and Abraham's faith counted for him as righteousness. This is Habakkuk 2:4. Paul loves it. Letter to the Hebrew loves it. Romans loves it. Galatians loves it. He builds his whole theology on this. So, the righteous shall live by his faith, taken out of context, is interpreted in Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews, that you, the righteous, shall live by your faith, but also your faith is in the righteous one, Jesus. And through faith in the righteous one, Jesus, you become righteous, and you live forever. So this is how I give you the exegesis as it's generally done. So it's a double-edged sword. Jesus is the righteous one. You want to be righteous, you become righteous, you get to be righteous by faith in the righteous one, and he makes you righteous. You know, Isaiah 53:11 is added to these. My servant, the righteous one, will justify many. My servant, he was the oppressed and outraged of men, and so on and so forth. You've probably, how many have heard of that one? Isaiah 53:11. Three basic building blocks of Christian theology. Isaiah 53:11, Genesis 15:6, Abraham's faith was counted for him as righteousness, and the righteous will live by his faith. You can see why putting all these three together constructs the theology as we know it, and it's very important for Pauline theology, which is a righteousness of faith, not of works. Works meant to Paul works of the law. You didn't need works of the law to justify you, as he puts it. By the way, my servant, the righteous one, will justify many, Isaiah 53:11. If you know the Hebrew, it goes, Avadi, I don't have it in front of me, Hatzadik, I may not have this right, Yazdik Rabin. Hatzadik is the righteous one. See, Hebrew is a very sort of simple language, doesn't have a big vocabulary. Arabic works the same way, but it's faster because it was used for a longer time. Hebrew got into writing early and it didn't develop because it was frozen in place. Arabic stayed oral for about 1,500 more years and it had a much faster vocabulary, but it operates in exactly the same way. So look at this. It's all Semitic languages have three-letter roots. English has a little bit like this too. The root of this word is ZDK. Now, depending on where you put the vowels in, and Hebrews don't write their words often with vowels. They leave the vowels out. So you have to put them in. In other words, like a shorthand, which makes it very difficult for people who don't speak these languages to actually read it, because you have to know the language before you can read it. In any case, sometimes prefixes are added. This is a prefix, Yah. So this is the righteous one. It's based on the word tzedek, righteousness, and see how the vowels change, right? And double, change. And here, Yazdik, this is a, I know this is crazy, you won't understand me, but this is a third form future causative. You say, what's a causative? It's a verb we don't have in English, to make something happen. So it means to make righteous. We call that justify. Oh, I'm justified. Well, what does that mean? I think I saw a movie on a movie director the other day. I want to go into my house justified. What? Justified. That's not what the Hebrew meant. It meant to make you righteous. If you mean by justify, not to make excuses for me, if you mean by justify to make you righteous, to make you just, turn you into a just, righteous person. You've got the Hebrew meaning. If you see that means something else, that's because as it moved into Greek and Latin, it got totally polarized. Because as you see from the Hebrew, the original passage, it is, Yah is future verb, and this form is third person, he form. He will make righteous. He will make righteous. He will make you righteous. Okay? So that's, if you think of justification of anything like that, then you have it right. So the Habakkuk 2:4 is very important because it continues that idea. The righteous one shall live by faith. You who are made righteous shall live forever through your faith. That's how these things are strung together. Now, here we go here. And God told Habakkuk, column 7 of the Habakkuk commentary, this was found in the first cave at Qumran, to write down all that would happen in the last generation. Oh, well, we're in the last times here, just like we think we are often. But he did not make known to him when that time would come to an end. This is all very, very rational. We don't know when the end of the last time is. And people in Calvary Chapel could be saying the same thing today. This is closer to evangelical thinking than any other kind you'll encounter. And as for what he said when he said, he who reads it may run speedily, the interpretation of this passage, that was in the previous one, write it down and make it plain and run speedily, that was Habakkuk 2:1-2. The interpretation of this passage concerns the teacher of righteousness, the leader of this community. This teacher teaches righteousness, the Moreh Tzedek he's called, to whom God made known all the mysteries of the words of the servants, the prophets. So the teacher of righteousness in the Dead Sea Scroll is an exegete, someone who knows the meaning of the words of the prophet through God having inspired him to understand this. So through whom God made known all the mysteries of the words of his prophets. And so they quote the next line from Habakkuk 2:3. For there shall yet be another vision concerning the appointed time, and it shall tell of the end, and it shall not lie. That's Habakkuk 2:3. Interpreted, this is obviously the righteous teacher's interpretation. This means, or the meaning of this passage is, that the final age shall be prolonged, and shall exceed all the prophets have said, for the mysteries of God are astonishing. That's the interpretation, not the passage. What's that saying? Then it goes, if it tarries, wait for it shall surely come, and shall not be late. Habakkuk 2:3. If you know the end of the Gospel of John, Jesus says to the beloved disciple, if I want him to wait for me, what's that to you, Peter? He can wait for me. This is about waiting and being patient. The final age will be prolonged and exceed anything the prophet has described. Okay, this passage concerns, according to the interpretation here, the men of truth, the doers of the Torah. Now that's really important. The passage relates to the doers of the Torah, whose hand shall not slacken in the service of the Torah, though the final age is prolonged. Now we have a name for that in Christianity. Any of you who study Christianity may or may not have heard of it, but now you have. The delay of the parousia. People were expecting Jesus' second coming right at the time of the documents we're talking about. But it turned out it got delayed. And we call that in Christian theology the delay of the parousia. The delay of the reappearance or second coming or the, whatever it is, of Christ. And that delay has been going on for quite a while, hasn't it? That delay has gone on for 2,000 years now, and the way things look, unless our friends who are expecting the rapture and selling all those novels about it are right, it might be delayed for another 2,000 years the way things are going. If we survive the next 100 years, we'll be lucky even to do that, I think. But in any case, the delay of the parousia is a well-known thing. This is the Dead Sea Scroll version of the delay of the parousia, saying to those people, we were wrong. The end time is not now. Things are falling apart now. Everything is collapsing. The delay is going to be very prolonged, very long. But if you do not slacken from your service, that's really interesting, of the law, Torah, it actually says Torah. That will be, then you are a doer. Letter of James, the New Testament says, be a doer, not a breaker. That is, you do that, or doing. You're not saved, as it turns out, according to them, by faith. You're saved by doing the law. Not advocating it, just telling you, setting up the parameters of the debate. And Jesus is going to fall right in the middle of those parameters. That's how we're going to have to try to find him. Where is he in this? At the moment, we think he's Paul. And I'm going to try to show that that's in historical Jesus. We don't need to do historical Jesus. If he is Paul, no problem. That is, if all his positions are Pauline, we're all free. But the point that all scholars have puzzled over is historical Jesus looks like he may be a little different than that. And I'm not saying he is or he isn't. That's up to you. You're the one who has to make your conclusion, not me. I think I know what I think, and you think you know what I think. But that doesn't matter. It's what you think that matters. For all the ages of God reach their appointed end, as he determines them in the mystery of his wisdom. It goes on, the beginning of 2:4. Behold, the soul is puffed up and is not upright. Paul talks about the puffed up leadership of the early church in 1 Corinthians 8. He said they are all puffed up by knowledge. He uses that expression in 1 Corinthians 8:1. When in fact they should be puffed up with love, he says.
Is it 8:1 and 2:8? 1 Corinthians?
No, it's 1 Corinthians 8:1. 1 Corinthians 8:1. I can read it to you later. I don't want to miss anything. This is not where I wanted to get to. As usual, I never get where I'm trying to go. That's why I said, bear with me. Just go do something in some other class for a while.
You have a page on the floor.
As long as my pants aren't falling down, we're in good shape. Let's see. That can happen too, because my belts don't seem to keep where they should be. Anyway, okay, look. Now look, concerning things sacrificed to idols, 8:1. We know that we all have knowledge. And here's his little jab. Knowledge puffs up. You see, the leadership of the community is supposed to have knowledge. But love builds up. Okay, boys, I'm in for the love side. I don't like your knowledge side. But if anyone thinks he knows anything, he has not known anything as he ought to know it. This is his rhetorical. He loves to know. Boom, boom, boom. Three-sided rhetorical argument with the word no, playing rhetorical games, which is part of Greek rhetoric. It's called, in Greek lyric odes, I think it's called strophe, antistrophe, epod. In logic, it's called dialectic. What is it in Marxian theory? It's thesis, antithesis, thesis, synthesis. As it is. He does this in rhetoric, you see. But if everyone thinks he knows anything, he has not known anything, as he ought to know something. But if anything, then he goes on to his point. But if anyone loves God, he is known by him. Now, the people I care about loving God is piety, and they're the people I like, so God knows them. You people are all full of bunkum. And what are they full of bunkum about? Then as to eating things sacrificed to idols, we know an idol is nothing in the world. There's no other God except one. Anyway, he spends the whole rest of the passage attacking the people who are forbidding people from eating things sacrificed to idols. And he goes on in 7, but some he doesn't like people, some with conscience of the idol, eat the thing sacrificed to an idol even now, and therefore their conscience being weak is defiled. But food does not commend us to God. Neither if we eat are we better off, nor if we don't eat are we worse off. This is his rhetoric and his polemics. It is polemics. I'm going to tell you what it all means in a second. But be careful for fear this strength of yours may because a stumbling block to these weaklings. The sort of Nietzschean weaklings. These people are weak. Why are they weak? They need the law. They depend on the law. You guys are free of the law. You're strong. You don't have to worry about things sacrificed to idols. You don't even see an idol there. They see an idol, therefore they're weak, their conscience is weak, therefore they have to avoid eating things sacrificed to idols. I'm telling it to you through a lot of understanding of this stuff. For if anyone sees you have knowledge dining in an idol temple, will not the weak one's conscience be builded up, so then that one will eat things sacrificed to idols too, and through your knowledge the weak brother for whom Christ died will fall. So all these weaklings that are around who make issues about these things, same with circumcision and other ones, but sinning is the way against brothers, wounding their weak conscience. You are sinning against Christ. He's being well behaved here. So, okay, here's the deal. If food causes my brother to stumble, I will never eat meat again forever, in order that I may not cause my brother to stumble. I'm going to be a vegetarian. Well, of course he isn't, because in the very next line he says further along, all things at the butcher shops are clean. Do not make problems over things over meat, and for me all things are lawful. There's no clean and unclean. Okay, say, well, I'm getting ahead of it. What's he attacking here? That spends all of 1 Corinthians attacking. What's he attacking here? Oh, nothing less than Acts 15. You see, say, how does Eisenman put all these things together? I'm the Christian and he's not. Yet he knows these things and I'm not. I haven't heard about all this. Well, because we studied the documents. We studied the scripture as you should do. Whatever religion you are, Muslim, Christian, Jew, Buddhist, whatever, you have to study the data. Okay, study it and you'll know it better than me because you're a believer. Okay, so what's the final outcome of the so-called Jerusalem Council, where Paul comes up to Jerusalem to put the gospel, as he puts it, among the people overseas, to the leadership of the Jerusalem church in succession to Jesus Christ, led by who? James, the brother of Jesus. And then James, after hearing Paul's psalm, makes his ruling. Say, okay, I say we shouldn't trouble newcomers with things of the law too much, except for 3 things. And what are the 3 things? Things sacrificed to idols, carrion, strangled things, fornication, and blood. 4 things, actually. Abstain from things sacrificed to idols, strangled things, carrying things that were died of itself on the road or were teared by beasts of prey. Undue fornication and blood, like the Jews do and the Muslims do. Don't eat things with blood in it. All that part is kind of the Quran. All those instructions have become the basic Quranic dietary law, the Acts 15, repeated in Acts 21. And who lays that down? James, the leader of the church. So what is the key there? The church leadership is saying, don't eat things sacrificed to idols. Paul says, oh, these are weaklings. That's what he's saying. And that's where you get to the puffed up thing. I'm back to the beginning. They're puffed up with their own knowledge. I'm puffed up with love. Love builds up. They tear down. And so he attacks them. Now you can say, oh, well, I'm on Paul's side. Paul's for me. Yeah, okay, that's the easy way. Paul's for you. And you can be on this side. But you see what the argument is here. And this is not just innocent prose. He's attacking the basic decisions that were made in Jerusalem in the 50s. And the principal one that he's supposed to abide by, he's just fulminating against here and laughing at it. Now, well, you can read it yourself. But unless you understand what the content, and he's using this passage, puffed up, that we have here, that introduces Habakkuk 2:4. Let me see if I can find my way before I end this little excursus here, just to, okay. Behold, his soul is puffed up and not upright within him. The beginning of Habakkuk 2:4. Interpreted, this means the wicked shall double the guilt upon themselves and shall not be forgiven when they are judged. Who's judging them? Oh, the last judgment we're talking about. We're talking about at the end of this book, the day of judgment, the judgment day. Finally, the righteous shall live by his faith. Habakkuk 2:4 be what we were getting to. Okay, I don't know, it's all ripped up here. Interpreted, this concerns all those who are doers of the Torah in the house of Judah, whom God will deliver from the house of judgment because of their works and because of their faith in the teacher of righteousness. Who God will deliver from, and later on we hear that the house of judgment is the thing that God delivers among many nations in the, with fire and brimstone and so on and so forth. So what do we have here? Basically, we have a Jamesian interpretation of Habakkuk 2:4. If you know how the letter of James, how many are familiar with that? In James 2, James attacks the foolish man who thinks you're saved by faith alone. And he says, it may not be a good argument, James says in James 2, don't you know, O foolish man? I think the actual translation is empty man. Don't you, doesn't name him. Don't you know, empty man, that Abraham, they both argue about Abraham, was counted a friend of God, and he was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac on the altar, and that's a work, not just faith. I don't think it's a very good argument, but anyway, that was the argument that was being used. And that's how we're saved. Faith and works working together. That's the James, and that's what you have here. You're saved by works and faith in the righteous teacher. But even more so, you have another qualification. This passage concerns the doers of the Torah in the house of Judah. Now, house of Judah is a fancy way of saying what? It's an old archaic. Jews. Jews are the house of Judah. And I don't want to be cruel here, but this document is very aware of things, how this passage is being used, I think. It's in this polemical situation. If it concerns these, then it does not concern non-doers of the law or the Torah in the house of Judah, but it also does not concern non-doers of the law outside the house of Judah. In other words, the passage only applies to doers of the law in the house of Judah because they're the ones who are heirs to the covenant. That's why Paul is so big on the heirs. Now, I'm not saying one group is right or wrong. I'm just showing you the ideological background. These documents are really, and to know we're on the day of judgment here and that things have fallen apart, that's why the last days are going to be prolonged. This thing ends up in its last passages. Of what use is an idol that its maker should shape it? This is from Habakkuk 2:18. For the craftsman puts his trust in his own creation. Interpreted, this concerns all the idols of the nations, which they make to serve and worship them. But these shall not save them on the day of judgment. Woe to the wood, awake, dumb, rise, keep such a, how can such a thing guide? This is Habakkuk 2:19-20. Behold, it's covered with gold and silver, but there's no spirit within it. But the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth be silent before him. That's the passage. Interpreted. This concerns all the nations who but serve stone and wood. But on the day of judgment, on the judgment day, God will destroy from off the earth all idolaters and evil men. That's how it ends. That's the end of this Pesher or thing on Habakkuk. Well, the evil men are, in my view, the backsliders among the Jews who do not do the Torah, if you want to call it that. I'm talking about their view now, not mine. And because I think a lot of wicked men do the Torah, and maybe they don't mean to be wicked, but they're not saints or anything necessarily. Anyway, and the others are the idolaters, are all the people who are idol worship all over the universe, which the Muslims have picked up in their thing. So this group, those things are falling apart. That the last time is going to be way extended. But the Lord is in his holy temple, is the passage how it ends in Habakkuk. Let all the earth be silent before him. So it retreats to faith in God. God is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be still. This relates to the day of judgment, that on which God will destroy from all the earth all these wicked people and idolaters. So it's consoling itself, knowing that that is what the final thing is going to be. It's very incredible. Insight in our law. Okay, your question.
No, whether he was whoever the righteous or in Habakkuk, are they referring to a Messiah still?
Well, you'll have to read the text more carefully than this to make that. It's a very complicated judgment, and it's not something I can tell you in 5 minutes. I'd have to take a whole course to decide what they're referring to there. So I just have to pass on that. Read some of my books, other people's books on this subject, and you'll have to draw your own conclusion. The problem is, has the Messiah come? Hasn't he come? Is he returning? So on. All I can say, it's a messianic group that's involved in messianic ideology. I don't know if for them it's come or not come or it's going to return. It isn't clear because it uses the word stand up, which is to be resurrected all of the time. You can read my 1,000-page books if you're got any patience, and you can take it, and maybe you'll discover some of the answers to those, but I can't give you. Okay, may I read one last thing? Oh, okay, go ahead.
What's undue fornication?
Well, it wasn't undue, I added undue. It's fornication. I don't want to be cruel. Should I use modern language?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it starts with SC and ends in ING, okay? So I don't have to put in the middle letters outside of marriage, I think. The things Muslims stone people for still today in strict Islamic environments. Anyway, I brought one other book that I want to just read you quick. We were talking about the book of Acts. Now this is called The Recognitions of Clement. Since I had it before me, I thought I would bring it to you. What happens is Clement, the narrator, supposedly, first person plural we, I, is narrating this, meets Peter in Rome. And the idea is that Peter is having confrontations with Simon Magus, the magician, and Clement, ultimately the first pope in Rome, from an upper-class Roman family. It looks like the actual family of the Caesars. And Paul, if you look at Philippians, actually sends greetings to the household of Caesar at the end of Philippians, those who are of Christ in the household of Caesar. At the end of Philippians, I don't have time to do all that for you. But in any case, so apparently the scribes and the Pharisees and these other groups are inviting the Christians, if we can call them that at this point, to come and debate on the temple steps. And all the different apostles sort of are standing on the steps and speak to some extent in turn. And then Peter speaks. Let's see if I can get up to it. And then Peter speaks. Now, then after he speaks, and there's a lot of trouble, James's turn comes, and they're going to bring James up. Now, this is section 46 of the first book of the Recognitions. This is one of the books that was banned at the councils in the 300s, but it survived. That's why it's called pseudo-Clement. Because it's supposed to be false writings. Now, when we came to our James, while we detailed to him all that I have said and done, we supped and remained first-person plural narrative, like Acts sometimes is, spending the whole night in supplication to Almighty God with him that the discourse of the approaching disputation might show the unquestionable truth of our faith. Therefore, on the following day, James, the bishop, went up, and later it calls him also the bishop of bishops, the archbishop, the leader of the early church, we're going to call him that, to the temple with us and with the whole church. There we found a great multitude had been waiting for us since the middle of the night. Therefore we took our stand in the same place as before, in order that standing in an elevation we might be seen by the people. Then, etc., James is introduced, and looking to James, the bishop, he was addressed in this manner by the leadership. I won't go on to that address, but they argue and so on. And then, in answer to all this, the sayings of this person who was speaking did much to please Caiaphas, the high priest, and holding him in suspicion as it seemed, he began to insinuating himself cunningly in the discussions. For smiling of what this person had said, the chief of the priests asked of James, the bishop of bishops, here it is, the chief of the bishops, the archbishop, that the discourses concerning Christ should not be drawn from scriptures, that we may know him, whether Jesus to be the very Christ. Then James said, we must first inquire from the scriptures, from what scriptures we're especially able to derive our discussion. Then then he with difficulty at length overcame by reason answered anyway. And finally, James answered this other person. To him our James began to show that whatsoever things the prophets say, they have taken from the law, and that they have spoken in accordance with the law. He also made some statements respecting the books of the kings, and what way and when, and by whom they were written, and how they ought to be used. And when he had discussed most fully concerning the law, and had by most clear exposition brought to light whatever the things are in concerning Christ, he showed by most abundant proofs that Jesus was the Christ, and that in him were fulfilled all the prophecies. That is the righteous teacher who knows how to interpret all of the prophecies and so on. For he showed the two advents were foretold, one in humiliation, which has already been accomplished, and the other in glory, which was about to be accomplished. When he shall come to the kingdom to those who believe in him and observe all the things in which he has commanded. And we have plainly taught the people and so on and so forth these things. It goes on like that. Where matters were at this point, entering the temple with a few men, the man who is our enemy. The man who is our enemy. And a marginal note says this is Paul, but we don't need the marginal note to tell us this, because Paul this person then gets letters from the high priest and pursues the community to Damascus. So we realize that it's Paul, but they don't want to name him. The man who is our enemy cries out, "What do you mean, Israel? Why are you so easily hurried? Why do you go headlong by this most miserable men?" While he was thus speaking and adding more to the same effect, and while James the bishop was refuting him, he began to excite the people and to raise a tumult, so the people might not be able to hear what was said. Thereupon he began to drive all into confusion and shouting, and to undo what had been arranged with much labor, and at the same time to reproach the priests and to arrange them with revilings and abuse, and like a madman to excite everyone to murder, saying, why do you hesitate, O you sluggish and inert? Why do you not lay hands on him and pull up all these fellows to pieces? And when he said this, he first, seizing a strong brand from the altar, set the example of smiting. Then others also, seeing him, were carried away with this madness, and ensued a tumult on either side of beating and beaten. Much blood was shed. There was a confused flight, in the midst of which the enemy, attacked James and threw him headlong down from the top of the stairs. And supposing him physically assaulted him, and supposing him to be dead, he cared not to inflict further violence on him. Okay, that's the picture of the attack in the temple. They say, well, this is crazy stuff. Yeah, it is crazy stuff. But the point is, it's very early stuff, 2nd century. And the book of Acts has an attack by Paul at this very same time, if you know the book of Acts. What's Paul doing? He's pulling people out. He's taking people out of their houses. There's a rampage of beating and ruin and so on. And the whole thing is supposed to be triggered by what? The stoning of Stephen, if you know the Acts episode. And then Paul gets letters from the high priest and pursues the community to Damascus, right? This is just an alternative document. But our friends lifted him up, so James wasn't dead. For they were both numerous and more powerful than the others. But from their fear of God, they rather suffered themselves to be killed by the inferior force than kill the others. But when evening came, the priest shut the temple and returned to the house of James. James has a house in Jerusalem. We find that out also later in Acts. And spend the night there in prayer. And that day at daylight we went down to Jericho with a number of 5,000 men. Then after 3 days we got a warning that the enemy had received a commission from Caiaphas, the chief priest, that he should arrest all who believed in Jesus and should go to Damascus with his letters, and that there also, employing the help of the unbelievers, he should wreak havoc among the faithful. And that he was hastening to Damascus, chiefly on this account, because he believed Peter had fled thither. And about 30 days thereafter, he stopped on his way while passing through Jericho, going to Damascus. Look at the detail here. And they miss him because they go out to the tomb of 2 of the brothers who are remembered before God and to pay homage to this tomb. So the community is missed in Jericho. While therefore we abode in Jericho and gave ourselves to prayer and fasting, James the bishop sent for me and sent me here to Caesarea, saying that Zacchaeus had written to him from Caesarea that Simon, a Samaritan magician, was subverting many of the people, and that he was, and so on and so forth. So at that point, he goes out. I guess this is, and then James gives him instructions. Now be sure to send me in writing every year an account of your doings, and especially at the end of every 7 years. And that's why this is a 7-yearly report. And he goes out, and when I entered the city, our most beloved brother met us, that is in Caesarea, and embraced me and brought me to the lodging in which he himself stayed, inquiring of me concerning each of the brethren, especially concerning our honorable brother James. When I told him he was still lame on one foot, limping on one foot, he immediately asked the cause and so on and so forth. And he tells them that it was because of the attack on the temple. And in other documents, we hear that James was thrown from the steps of the temple and broke one or both his legs. That's in Jerome. What am I saying? The detail here is quite astonishing. Quite astonishing. The guy even knows that James has a broken leg. He knows that he's limping on one foot, how many weeks later? 6 weeks later, or whatever it is. And what happened? I guess this is Peter being sent to Caesarea. The point is that this is the first missionary journey that Peter is sent out on to confront Simon Magus. And Acts has a similar thing, but Acts has Peter going to Samaria. The point is that Simon Magus, as we find out, came from Samaria, but the confrontation is in Caesarea on the coastline, not in Samaria. So these are differences. What I'm pointing out is that these are other books that we don't usually know about. Now that doesn't mean they have the stamp of truth, authenticity. They're all novel type books, if you want to call them that. But it's interesting data. So we have a situation set up here that the person we all consider the main apostle is considered by these people the enemy of God. And that they're led by this righteous one, James, the brother of the Lord. And that is backed up to in some of the material we get, and in the anger we see in the Pauline corpus. So I just happen to be working on this stuff at the moment, and I wanted to give you that background for whatever it is worth. Last questions before we pick up again. I don't know why I got sidetracked, but I had those books with me, so I thought I would tell you about them. I won't have to cover them again now that I have read them. Anyone else have any?
What was the book called that you were just reading?
Oh, that one? The Recognitions of Clement, often called the Pseudo-Clementine. Usually there are two versions. The Recognitions, which has this material in it, and the Homilies, which doesn't. The Homilies looks like this has been deleted from it. Most of the rest of the Homilies have James the leader also. James and Peter are both daily bathers who rise at dawn to meet the sun in the Dead Sea, Essene manner, who bathe every day at dawn, who only eat pure foods, who are vegetarians, and so on. And otherwise the homily is exactly the same as the Recognition. Plus the homilies has a letter from Peter to James and a letter from Clement to James at the beginning, and it also has a letter from James to, I think, Clement at the beginning. Yeah.
When were these documents written? Do they know?
They were already circulating in the 2nd century somehow. That's all we know. That's all we know. But my position is, and I write about them extensively, is that they are both based on the same source as Acts. In other words, Acts and these are based on the same source. The only question is, who do you think is more faithful to the original source? And the way you can determine this is things like, did the confrontations with Simon Magus occur in Samaria? And was it over some bribery issue? And was there a stoning Stephen at this point, whoever Stephen may or may not have been? Or was there some argument in the early church, as Acts puts it there? Or does one actually have a substitution or override, if you want, for this episode that we have here, the attack on James, not Stephen, who was ultimately stoned like Stephen, as it turns out, but not for another 20 years. So you'll have a condensation of 2 attacks of James into this one Stephen episode here. And otherwise you can see that it's very similar. But anyway, that's a different course. That's Christian Origins course. We don't teach that here in this particular class. But these are some of the documents available, which is why I want to show you that there are these serious arguments in the first couple of centuries over what did and didn't happen. And the Western Christian groups, who finally became what we call Christianity that we're familiar with, compiled the documents that we now have. But the Eastern, not the Eastern churches, which were just part of the Western church at this time, but the Eastern groups that disappeared in Syria, Iraq, Arabia, went into this funny book I have here that I showed you, that one with all the funny documents, Baptists in Iraq that still exist, went into what was called Manichaeism in the 2nd century, who saw himself as the seal of the prophets and messenger to the Babylonian people and so on. Finally, Islam and different religions like that. So that these were absorbed, but the apocryphal literature stayed on. And then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls to throw into the whole mix. So when you have this whole mix of stuff, you can start to decide in Palestine, Jordan, let's say, Palestine and Transjordan area, what was actually happening there. And then now we'll go to the Gospels and start looking at those and see what their view of what was actually happening there is. Okay, any other questions? Sorry to waste your time here. We'll get more organized and we'll get more focused as we develop. So enjoy your sort of vacation now. Later on we'll get more direction. Thanks for your patience.
James is born in the sense by whom?
By Paul.